Story 1. The Crawlspace Breathing. I bought the house because it was practical, not because it was charming. 2 bedrooms, a small yard, a garage that actually fit a car, and a price that made me feel like I'd gotten away with something. People told me the same thing over and over when I mentioned it. Older homes have quirks. You get used to the noises. The first winter is always the loudest. I believed them because I wanted to. The crawlspace access was in the hallway closet behind a stack of paint cans the previous owner had left behind like an unwanted inheritance. The door was a square of plywood with a metal ring handle, and it sat flush with the floor so perfectly that I didn't notice it at first. When I did, it made me feel weirdly proud, like I'd discovered a secret feature. The inspector had opened it during the walkthrough, shone a light down and said, "Dry enough. You'll want a dehumidifier if you store anything down there." He said it the way people say, "You'll want to salt your driveway." Routine advice. Normal. The first night I slept there, the house made the usual settling sounds, soft pops from the walls, a distant creak as the temperature dropped, the occasional sigh from the ductwork. I was exhausted from moving, so I drifted in and out of sleep with those noises as a kind of lullaby. The second night, I woke at 3:11 a.m. to a sound I couldn't place. It wasn't a bang or a crash. It wasn't even loud. It was rhythmic, slow, and close, as if someone had put their ear to the floor beneath my bedroom and was breathing heavily through their nose. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. A wet, patient sound, almost thoughtful. I lay still and listened until my heart stopped trying to climb out of my throat. Then the breathing stopped. For a few seconds, the silence returned, thick and ordinary. My brain tried to label it. Wind, ducts, me imagining things. I started to relax. And that's when I heard the crawlspace door ring. A soft metallic rattle, like a key on a chain, coming from the hallway closet. Once, then again, a little harder. Someone, something, was testing the ring handle from below. I sat up. The room was dark except for the faint glow of my phone. The house felt bigger at night, full of empty rooms and blind corners, and I became intensely aware that I lived there, alone. No roommate to blame, no partner to nudge awake and say, "Did you hear that?" No one else to make the fear feel social, manageable. I grabbed my phone and walked to the closet in my bare feet, hating how loud my steps sounded on the hardwood. When I opened the closet door, the smell hit me first. Cold earth and old wood, and something faintly sour beneath it, like damp cloth left too long in a sealed bag. The crawlspace access panel sat there, the metal ring handle still. I crouched and put my hand on the plywood. It felt colder than the floor around it. "Hello?" I said, quietly, because whispering felt safer than speaking. Nothing answered. No scuffling, no animal sounds. No breathing. I told myself it had been a raccoon or a rat. I told myself it had been the house settling, the ring shifting in its bracket. I told myself a dozen comforting things that night, and somehow I managed to go back to sleep. Over the next week, I started noticing patterns. The breathing sound came every night, always after 3, never before. It would last for a minute or two, then stop as soon as I moved, like it could hear the change in my posture. Sometimes I'd hear a soft scraping under the hallway closet, not frantic like an animal, but careful, as if something were repositioning itself. I bought a cheap motion sensor light and placed it in the closet, aimed at the crawlspace panel. If the handle moved, the light would flash and I'd know I wasn't imagining it. The first night with the sensor, the light stayed off. The second night, it clicked on at 3:11 a.m. I woke to the glow spilling under my bedroom door. a pale white line like the house had opened one eye. I held my breath, listening, and heard the ring handle rattle softly. Not a violent shake, just a little movement like fingers turning it back and forth. The sensor light turned off after 30 seconds, but the rattling continued in the dark. I forced myself out of bed and stood in the hallway, my body vibrating with adrenaline. The closet door was closed. The line of light was gone. The house looked normal again. Then I heard it, something that turned my blood cold because it wasn't a sound the house could make by accident. A knock. From beneath the crawlspace panel. One soft tap, then another, slow and deliberate, like a person asking to be let out. My brain flashed to every story I'd ever read about hidden squatters, about people living in walls. I imagined a desperate stranger trapped under my floorboards, begging for help. So I did the stupid human thing. I spoke. "If you're down there," I said, voice shaking, "I'm calling the police." Silence. Then from below came my own voice, muffled by wood, repeating my sentence perfectly. "If you're down there, I'm calling the police." I stood frozen, the air in my lungs turning to stone. It wasn't an echo. The timing was wrong. The cadence was slightly improved, smoother than mine, like someone had rehearsed it. My phone slipped in my sweaty hand. I tightened my grip and backed away. The crawlspace panel didn't move. The handle didn't rattle. It was as if the thing beneath the house had achieved what it wanted. My attention, my confirmation of its existence, and then gone still to enjoy the effect. The next morning, I called a contractor. I didn't tell him the truth. I said I wanted the crawlspace checked for pests and moisture. He arrived in the afternoon with a bright work light and a cheerful attitude that felt almost offensive in my tense, sleep-starved house. He pulled the paint cans aside and lifted the panel. The air that rose from the opening was colder than the rest of the home, like the breath of a cellar. He shone his light down and climbed partway in, shoulders disappearing below the floor line. I stood behind him, arms folded, pretending I was just being a conscientious homeowner. He was quiet for a long moment, then he said, "Huh." "What?" I asked, and my voice cracked on the word. He climbed back out, dusting his hands. "Your vapor barrier's torn, but that's not the weird part." I waited, trying not to look like a child. He pointed at the underside of the crawlspace panel. There were marks along the edge of it, long, shallow grooves in the wood, like something had been dragging across it repeatedly. Not random scratches, parallel lines, evenly spaced. "Rodents?" I asked, desperate for that word. He shook his head slowly. "Doesn't look like teeth," he said. "More like nails, but too wide." He set the panel back down, and the ring handle fell into place with a soft clink that made my stomach flip. "You want me to replace it?" he asked, already reaching for his tools. I nodded too quickly. "Yes, today." He replaced the panel with a thicker one, added screws around the edges, and sealed it so thoroughly it looked like it had never been meant to open. He left, and I spent the evening pretending I'd solved the problem, pretending the house had been reduced to normal physics. That night, at 3:11 a.m., I woke to breathing again. Not beneath my bedroom, beneath my bed. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. I sat up so fast my spine protested, and the breathing stopped. Then, from the hallway closet, I heard the slow, patient sound of metal being turned against wood. A screw twisting. One of the new screws was being unscrewed from below. I didn't stay another night in that house. I threw clothes into a bag, grabbed my keys, and left without even putting on proper shoes. I drove to a motel on the edge of town and sat in the parking lot until sunrise, watching my hands shake on the steering wheel. When I finally returned in daylight with a friend and a borrowed drill, the closet smelled worse than before, like damp rot warmed by heat. The crawlspace panel was still sealed, still screwed down, still intact. But the ring handle was upright, and there were fresh grooves around it, as if something beneath the wood had traced its shape again and again, practicing the motion in the dark. I sold the house 6 months later, at a loss that made my stomach hurt. I told the buyer the crawlspace access had been sealed for insulation. I didn't mention breathing. I didn't mention the voice. I didn't mention the screws. But sometimes I wake at 3:11 a.m. in my new apartment, and in the quiet, I swear I can hear that slow inhale-exhale rhythm in the plumbing, as if whatever lives under floors doesn't care which house you choose. Story 2. The Attic Ladder. The attic ladder was one of the reasons I liked the place. I know how that sounds, but I grew up in apartments where storage meant stacking boxes until rooms stopped being rooms. The first time I toured the house, the agent pulled a cord in the hallway ceiling, and the ladder folded down like a neat trick. I remember looking up into the dark square of attic space and feeling relief at the idea that my life could be contained. Holiday decorations above, clutter out of sight, everything in its proper category. After we moved in, I used the attic often, not daily, but enough that it became familiar. The dry smell of insulation, the scratch of plywood under my knees, the way the rafters framed the darkness into simple geometry. It was just a space above the ceiling, empty, useful, unromantic. The first strange thing happened in late November, when the nights got longer and the house started making winter sounds. My wife had gone to bed early, and I stayed up to watch TV, half asleep on the couch. The house was quiet in that deep, post-midnight way where even the refrigerator sounds dramatic. Then I heard the attic ladder cord swing. It made a faint tapping sound against the ceiling, like someone had nudged it. I looked up automatically, expecting to see it moving. It was perfectly still. I told myself it was air pressure, the HVAC kicking on, a draft. I went back to the TV and let myself drift. A few minutes later, I heard a different sound, a soft creak, overhead, traveling from one end of the hall to the other. Not the sharp pop of wood contracting, but the long complaint of weight shifting. Footsteps, slow, measured. One step, pause. Another step, pause. As if someone was walking on the plywood above our ceiling and trying not to be heard. I muted the TV and sat upright. My heart started doing that stupid thing where it tries to solve fear by pumping harder. I stood and listened. The footsteps continued, moving toward the attic access point in the hallway. Then they stopped directly above the ladder. There was a long silence, and then, from the ceiling, came a sound like knuckles tapping wood. 3 gentle knocks. I stood there staring up, mouth dry. My first thought was the most rational. Squirrels. Raccoons. Something had gotten into the attic. It happens. Old houses invite animals in like an unasked-for hobby. But animals don't knock. I woke my wife, and she looked at me the way people do when you wake them for something that might be nothing. "What is it?" she mumbled. "I heard something in the attic," I said. She sighed, rubbed her eyes, and then froze when the footsteps started again, right above us, as if the thing had been waiting for an audience. We stood together in the hallway, both of us staring at the attic door like it might blink. "Call someone," she whispered. So I did. I called my brother, because he lives nearby, and he's the type to show up with tools and confidence. He arrived 20 minutes later in sweatpants and a hoodie, carrying a flashlight like it was a sword. We pulled down the ladder slowly, half expecting something to drop out. Nothing did. The attic opening yawned, dark above us. My brother climbed first, flashlight beam cutting through insulation dust. I followed, then my wife stayed below, watching. The attic looked normal. Boxes, old suitcases, a roll of wrapping paper. No nests, no droppings, no obvious entry points. My brother crawled farther, inspecting the roofline. No animals, he said, sounding almost disappointed. Then what was it? I asked. He shrugged. House sounds. Maybe you heard the ductwork. I wanted to believe him. I really did. We climbed down, folded the ladder back up, and forced ourselves to laugh about it. My brother left, my wife went to bed, and I sat in the living room with the lights on, feeling stupid for being afraid of empty air. At 2:26 a.m., the attic ladder unfolded by itself. Not all the way, just enough that the first segment dropped with a soft thud, hanging at an angle like a broken elbow. The sound snapped me out of my half-sleep. I stared down the hallway and saw the ladder dangling, not fully extended, swaying slightly as if it had been pushed. My wife called from the bedroom, voice thick with sleep. "What now?" I didn't answer, because I was watching the ladder cord. It moved. The cord lifted, slowly, as if something above was pulling it up, then letting it down, testing the slack. I walked into the hallway, keeping my distance. The ladder swayed again. A faint creaking came from above, like someone shifting their weight right at the opening. I whispered, "Who's up there?" Silence. Then a voice, faint and muffled, came from the attic opening. It sounded like my wife. "Can you come up?" it said softly. "I can't get down." My skin went cold so fast it felt like pain. Behind me, in the bedroom, my real wife said, irritated, "What are you talking about? I'm right here." The voice above repeated more insistently, "Can you come up? I can't get down." My wife appeared at the end of the hall, eyes wide now, fully awake. We stood side by side, staring at the ladder like it was a wound in the ceiling. My wife whispered, "That's my voice." The ladder creaked again, and I saw, for a fraction of a second, a shadow shift at the edge of the opening, something pulling back from the light. I did the only thing my brain could handle. I grabbed the ladder and pushed upward, forcing the segments back into the ceiling with a strength I didn't know I had. It fought me with a soft resistance, like pushing against a door held shut by someone on the other side. When it finally clicked closed, the hallway went silent. We didn't sleep. We sat in the living room until dawn with every light on, listening for footsteps above the ceiling. Nothing moved. Nothing knocked. The house held its breath. The next day we called an attic company. The technician was a cheerful man with a clipboard who treated our fear like an overreaction to insulation. He inspected the access panel, the hinges, the latch. "It's a standard pull-down ladder," he said. "Sometimes the latch gets loose with temperature changes." I pointed out that it had opened by itself. He smiled politely. "It can happen." "Can it mimic voices?" I asked before I could stop myself. He blinked. "What?" I didn't answer. I just watched him climb into the attic. He was quiet for a long time. When he climbed down, his face had changed, still professional but tense around the eyes. "What?" I asked, and my voice sounded small. He hesitated. "There's something odd up there," he said carefully. "The insulation around the access point has been compressed, like someone's been lying there." My wife made a sound in her throat that wasn't quite a gasp. The technician continued. "I also found a little trail. like repeated handprints in the dust. It goes to the far corner and stops. Stops at what? I asked. He swallowed. At nothing. Just stops. We paid him and thanked him and watched him leave, and then we did what people do when reality stops making sense. We tried to restore normal rules. We installed a new latch. We added a bolt lock from inside the hallway closet. We convinced ourselves it was over. That night at 2:26 a.m., the bolt lock rattled. Not violently, just a gentle rhythmic jiggle, like someone testing it with patience, confident it had time. I stared at the closet door, sweat cold on my back, and tried not to imagine what it meant, that whatever had been above our ceiling had learned where the lock was, had learned the sound it made, had learned the exact hour we were most exhausted. Then the voice came again, this time clearer, closer, as if it had moved down into the space between ceiling and drywall. It sounded like me. "Open it," my voice whispered, right above our heads. "I'm stuck." My wife grabbed my hand so hard it hurt. We stayed silent until dawn. We stayed silent the next night too, and the night after, because we realized something terrifyingly simple. The more we responded, the more it tried. We moved out in January, telling friends it was for work, for convenience, for anything except the truth. We sold the house quickly, and when the new owners posted a photo online of their first Christmas decorations in the hallway, I zoomed in on the ceiling without meaning to. The attic ladder cord was hanging lower than it should have, as if it had been gently pulled and left that way. Like a reminder. Like a hand waiting within reach. Story 3. Don't go into the basement alone. The basement wasn't finished. That's what the listing said, like it was a neutral fact. Unfinished basement, concrete floor, utility room, storage potential. The agent called it a blank canvas. But everyone who walked down those stairs used the same word afterward without being prompted. Creepy. The stairs were narrow, and the light switch was at the top, which meant you either turned on the bulb and stepped down into the dim cone of light, or you went down in darkness and hoped your feet found each step. The basement smelled like old stone and cold water even when it was dry. The air felt heavier, as if it had been sitting still for years. When I moved in, I promised myself I'd clean it out and put shelves down there. I told myself I'd make it useful, tame it, turn it into just another part of the house. I avoided it for weeks. Then the pipes started acting up. The sink would gurgle. The shower pressure would dip for no reason. The kind of small problems that force you to confront the spaces you'd rather ignore. So one evening, I took my phone flashlight and went down. The bulb overhead was weak and yellow, and it made the basement corners look too deep. The furnace sat like a dormant animal. The water heater ticked softly. Everything had that quiet, mechanical life that makes you feel like you're trespassing in your own home. I checked the visible pipes, found nothing obvious, and started to climb back up. Halfway up, I heard a sound behind me. A soft scuff on concrete. It wasn't a rodent skitter. It wasn't a drip. It was the sound of something moving slowly, like a foot shifting to redistribute weight. I froze, one hand on the railing, and listened. Silence. I told myself it was the furnace settling, metal expanding, some rational mechanical shift. I continued up. Then I heard it again, this time closer to the stairs. A scuff, a pause, another scuff. As if something had moved into the space beneath the steps where the light from upstairs didn't reach. I didn't turn around. I finished climbing, shut the basement door, and locked it with the little hook latch I'd never used before. My hands shook, and I hated myself for it. It was a basement. It was empty. I was an adult. That night, the basement door rattled. Not a bang, not a slam, but a gentle vibration, like someone tapping the door frame with a fingernail. It stopped when I stood near it. It started again when I walked away. It felt less like an attempt to get out, and more like a test. Will you come? Will you listen? I slept badly. The next day I bought a heavier lock, a simple deadbolt, and installed it myself. The work was clumsy, but when I turned the key and felt the solid click, I felt relief, as if a physical barrier could force my mind to calm down. For 2 nights, nothing happened. On the third night, I woke to the sound of water running. Not in my sink, not in my shower, not in the pipes in the walls. It sounded like water moving freely, in a stream, down in the basement. A steady rushing sound that made my mouth go dry because it suggested flooding. I stumbled out of bed and into the hall. The basement door was closed. The lock was intact. I pressed my ear against the wood. The water sound was real, constant, alive. I grabbed the key, unlocked the deadbolt, and opened the door. The basement staircase was dark. The bulb at the top didn't turn on when I flipped the switch. I tried again. Nothing. The house's power was fine everywhere else, but the basement light was dead. The water sound continued, steady and inviting, as if it were meant to pull me downward. I should have closed the door. I know that now. But the thought of a burst pipe flooding the foundation pushed me, because practical fear can override supernatural fear when money is involved. I turned on my phone flashlight and went down. The air changed immediately, colder, wetter. The water sound grew louder. I reached the bottom step and swept my light across the concrete floor. It was dry, no pooling, no stream, no glisten, no leak. The sound of rushing water continued anyway, coming from the far corner near the utility room, where the light seemed to struggle, as if the darkness absorbed it. I walked closer, the beam shaking in my hand. The sound stopped the moment my light hit the corner. Not faded, not diminished. Stopped, like a recording paused. In the silence that followed, I heard something else. Breathing. Soft, slow, close enough that it felt like it brushed the back of my neck. I spun around, light flaring across the basement, across the furnace, the stairs, the stacked boxes. Nothing. But the breathing didn't stop. It just shifted, as if it had moved to a different spot in the dark at the edge of my beam. I backed toward the stairs, trying not to panic, trying not to move like prey. My foot hit something on the floor, a small object that hadn't been there before. I looked down. It was my basement key. The key I had used upstairs, the one that had been in my hand when I unlocked the door, lay on the concrete at my feet. My stomach dropped. My palm was empty. My fingers were numb. I didn't remember dropping it. I didn't remember it leaving my hand at all. I snatched it up and ran up the stairs. I slammed the basement door behind me and locked it with a speed that felt animal. My chest burned. My legs shook so badly I had to sit on the floor in the hallway. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, from behind the basement door, I heard the rushing water start again. Steady, relaxed, and woven into it, barely audible at first, came the sound of my own voice. Not loud, not clear, just the shape of my speech, my cadence, repeating a phrase I'd said earlier in the week when I carried boxes down there. I'll clean this out tomorrow. The voice repeated it, softer, closer to the wood,
as if it were leaning in. "I'll clean this out tomorrow." My skin went cold. The phrase wasn't special. It wasn't a secret. That was the point.
It had been listening to the most ordinary parts of me, collecting them like scraps. The next day I called a plumber for the pipes and told him the basement had a weird echo. He laughed politely, checked the lines, found a small blockage, and fixed it in an hour. Everything was normal. The water sound never happened while he was there. The basement behaved like a basement when a professional was present, like it knew how to wear a mask. That night, the basement door was unlocked when I woke. I hadn't unlocked it. I never left it unlocked anymore. The key was on my nightstand, exactly where I always put it. I got out of bed, heart pounding, and walked to the door. The latch was open. The deadbolt was turned. The basement smelled damp, and from below came a soft, patient sound. Footsteps on concrete, slow and measured, moving not toward the stairs, but away, deeper into the basement, as if something had just retreated from the doorway when it heard me wake. I didn't go down. I didn't call out. I shut the door and locked it, and then I shoved a chair beneath the handle like it was a motel room in a bad neighborhood. In the morning, I found wet footprints on the basement door's interior side. Not on the floor, not on the stairs. On the door itself, as if someone with wet feet had pressed them against the wood from the inside, leaving a pair of prints at chest height. Like a child being held up. Like someone testing how tall they were. I left that house within a month. Not dramatically, not in a single night of screaming. I left the way people leave bad places in real life. Slowly, rationally, with excuses. I said it was the commute, the upkeep, the costs. I said I wanted something smaller. The new owners asked about the basement lock during the sale. I told them it was for safety. I didn't explain the chair marks on the floor. I didn't tell them about the water that wasn't there. I didn't tell them that the house could unlock itself without moving the key. Because the most terrifying part wasn't that something lived down there. It was that it didn't feel trapped in the basement at all. It felt like it was practicing the idea of coming upstairs, learning the sounds of my routine, learning my voice, learning the shape of my fear, waiting for the night I finally did the one thing it wanted, waiting for me to go down alone.